Shira, and this is our continuing series of the planets through the individual 12 signs of the zodiac. And today we are moving forward with Saturn. And what does Saturn rule? Saturn in astrology rules discipline. Saturn is known to be a teacher, and how we handle wisdom and responsibility in life, our outlook. And Saturn through each sign and through the house placement and your Saturn sign depositor will color your view on life, maturity, and discipline through the sign of Saturn. Now, Saturn rules Capricorn and more modern day Aquarius. Saturn used to be, I should say, the old ruler of Aquarius, and now Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. However, Saturn still rules Aquarius and Capricorn, and Saturn's detriment is, of course, the opposite signs of Cancer and Leo. It is at its best in Libra, and its fall, where it's not at its best placement, is in Aries. Now, depending on Saturn through your sign, Saturn in each sign will determine how you will handle Saturn's serious, mature, and yet wise nature. So, the first Saturn sign we have is Saturn in Aries. Now, Aries rules the first house, and Aries is one who likes to have things now. Should have been done yesterday. Aries is aggressive. They don't wait, generally impulsive, but are brilliant thinkers, because Saturn in Aries, or Aries, rules the first house and our mind. Now, Saturn in Aries. Saturn rules conservatism. Saturn is serious-minded. Saturn is about history. Saturn is very patient and a teacher. They don't do anything impulsively. Not with Saturn. Now, Saturn in Aries will temper somewhat of the Aries aggressive, impulsive nature. However, because Saturn is with Aries, a Saturn in Aries individual can get rather frustrated if they don't get quick results, and as a result can become rather rash or foolhardy in their actions. The teacher for Saturn in Aries is that those with Saturn in Aries temper and learn Saturn from their aggressive, or I want it now, or what I want, me nature, and temper this towards steadfastness and much in the way of patience. And because Saturn is a teacher, if those that have Saturn in Aries learn how to temper their frustration when they do not get what they want now, and they grow wise in wisdom, the Saturn in Aries individual will become very patient. As they become older, they will see that yes, time and patience is a virtue, and that if they are wise in their youth, the Saturn Aries individual will learn to be more people-oriented, more giving, and not about what their needs are first. Because this is what Saturn has to teach those with Saturn in Aries. But Saturn in the sign of Aries are great thinkers, very serious-minded thinkers, and you very likely will have talent or find many people that are very good at expressing the written or the spoken word regarding their opinions and philosophies. Saturn will give patience to those with Saturn in Aries in time, especially regarding their great communicative skills. Okay, so let's look at the next Saturn, which is in Taurus. Now, Saturn through the sign of Taurus is ruled by Venus, because Saturn in Taurus is ruled by Venus. So where you have, of course, Venus in your chart, by sign and house placement, not just Saturn, will make a difference in your outlook through the sign of Saturn. Now, Saturn in Taurus, well, let's look at the breakdown here. Saturn, again, rules maturity, responsibility, sage, and it is a wise teacher. It respects the old and history, conservative. Taurus is similar to Saturn. So Taurus is ruled by Venus, but Taurus is an earth sign and Saturn rules an earth sign. So there is an association there with the sensible and the practical. Now, Taurus rules the second house. And Taurus likes the material. They like creature comforts. These people are great with money and savings. However, they're very stubborn because it is a fixed sign. So, Saturn in Taurus. The lessons that Saturn teaches those that have Saturn through the sign of Taurus is not to be so material or so self-oriented in a more self-oriented fashion. This individual will learn through time that they must save money and conserve their resources. It's not unusual you will find somebody with Saturn who is extremely conservative as far as their resources and their money. They will have to learn that through time that they have to share. because Taurus likes their stuff, and a lot of Taurus energy is one where they like their stuff for them. So the teacher through Saturn in Taurus is that it's about sharing and giving. And this is one of the lessons that Saturn will teach those with Saturn in Taurus. Now, Saturn and Taurus go well together. And ruling the second house, Saturn with Taurus is good because Taurus is very mature and very slow and steady. So the Taurus sign can relate to that about Saturn, which is the wise, the mature. And so a lot of Saturn in Taurus individuals are very stable, very wise and mature, and have a very good, strong sense of patience. They are not impulsive. Saturn in Taurus individuals are very grounded in the practical. And the wisdom through Saturn that those with Taurus, which rules the second house, will learn is about the material, about giving. And so you will find as a Saturn in Taurus individual grows older and wiser, if they learn the lessons in their youth about giving and kindness, charity, Saturn and Taurus individuals will become very charitable and very compassionate as they get older. And instead of holding on to their wealth, they are going to become very giving and very charitable. And because Saturn is in a fixed sign, the lesson with Saturn in Taurus is those to loosen the reins a little bit and become a little bit more objective in their thinking than very fixed and stubborn. And the lesson Saturn teaches Taurus with Saturn in Taurus is to become less obstinate, less fixed, more objective, and more compassionate and caring. And with time, Saturn in Taurus will. Now, the next Saturn sign we have is Saturn in Gemini. Now, Saturn, again, rules history, maturity, wisdom. When you combine Saturn in Gemini, we're talking a little bit again here about a conflict, because Gemini is ruled by Mercury, and Gemini likes to chatter and likes to communicate. Saturn through Gemini is one who sometimes as a youth may have issues with communication, and that can be literal speech or writing ability. However, Saturn with Gemini is teaching those with Saturn in Gemini that you must develop confidence with your communication skills, because Saturn sometimes also can be restrictive. So many a time, those with Saturn in Gemini can fear, which also is, by the way, ruled by Saturn, our fears, give a fear or worrisome ability to communicate their feelings and expressive nature. So those with Saturn in Gemini will have to overcome some of their communicative skills. However, Saturn is a teacher. So Saturn will help those with Saturn in Gemini to communicate well and very effective as they mature. And you will find some of the greatest writers, speakers, and communicators have Saturn in Gemini. However, the downside with Saturn in Gemini, because it does rule the third house, is sometimes those with Saturn in Gemini can do the opposite. They can communicate too much and become very opinionated, both in the written and the spoken word. And this can be debilitating to some degree. And with the other side of the coin, with Saturn in Gemini, these individuals will have to learn as they get older when to speak properly and when not to speak, because Saturn through Gemini likes to chatter. And in that chatter, they can become rather scattered in their thinking, or very much one who speaks and thinks later. So this is a trait that Saturn in Gemini through time will have to learn. And as they get older, they will develop wonderful communication skills and will become very fine thinkers and speakers, communicators in society. But it is only after their youth, if they have learned the lessons of communicating properly. And like, as I aforementioned, there are some of the Saturn in Gemini individuals as youths that may literally suffer from sometimes, that is, speech impediments or problems with communication, and sometimes learning, because Saturn is putting the brakes and restricting the thinking here to some degree. Gemini individuals and those with Mercury or even Mars in Gemini, and in this case Saturn in Gemini, are those who like to express their opinions and ideas. So Saturn will discipline those with Saturn in Gemini to be more soft-spoken in their manner. But when they get older and more mature, wonderful journalists, wonderful speakers, and again, communicators. Now, let's look at the next Saturn, which is in Cancer. And Saturn, again, is maturity, wisdom, history. It is a teacher. And Cancer rules the fourth house. The fourth house, somewhat like the second house, rules creature comforts, and it rules money, but more on a level of real estate, land, investments. Although the second house can rule that as well, the second house is predominantly about our money. But in this case, Saturn is about collecting And that's not just resources, as in land or money. Cancer with Saturn is one who is very good at being resourceful. And sometimes they are so resourceful, those with Saturn in Cancer can be a collector of feelings as well as a collector of resources. And Saturn in Cancer is one who believes and is very good at collecting and placing such a strong emphasis on resources, and that can also be emotional resources because Saturn is through a water sign now. That the lesson for Saturn in Cancer is that these people are so giving, Cancer, fourth house, that their lesson is to loosen the reins a little bit, to be less emotional, and less actually giving, in this case, emotionally or mentally, to the point where the Saturn in Cancer individual has a tendency to deny their own needs. So Saturn's kind of doing a 180 towards what Cancer, the sign itself, represents, which is a love of the creature comforts and a very giving soul, about kindness, and of course security. The other side of the coin with Saturn in Cancer is these people are so in need of feeling secure and have such fears of security that they, on the other side of the coin, they don't want to lend their resources. They don't really want to help others because Saturn has somehow made them afraid in their early life. Some people with Saturn in Cancer grew up poor, and because they became very resourceful, self-resourceful, both personally and financially, they became in their life very wealthy. And so it gives a tendency, Saturn, to kind of do the opposite of Cancer, which is become kind of self-oriented, selfish, and not want to give for fear from their youth and childhood that they are going to lose their resources. So as a Saturn in Cancer matures, their lesson is to loosen some of their fears about giving and caring, Cancer, and security, that it's okay to realize that you can give and you will be given back in return. And the more you give, the more you give back. And that your resources are always going to be there because you are self-sufficient. So these are some of the fears that Saturn in Cancer has. But as they get older, Saturn in Cancer individuals will be some of the most generous, caring, and giving individuals, but they must learn about giving and caring as they get older, and they have to do kind of a sit-down psychology regarding their fears about security, that if they chip away at those fears as they get older, they will become very less fearful and very giving. Okay, so we move to the next Saturn, which is in Leo. Now, Saturn is maturity, wisdom. And Leo is ruled by the sun, and it is ruling the 5th house. Now, what does the 5th house rule? The 5th house rules children. It rules speculation. And it also rules our attitude towards fun. So what is Saturn teaching those who have Saturn in Leo? Saturn is saying when you are not looking to have fun and to have all the attention, because Leo loves attention, is very confident, and you give without wanting to have that attention or that adulation. You are a natural entertainer having Saturn with Leo, and you have a natural sense of confidence. If you can give back some of that confidence to other people and become more supportive of other people and not try to gain attention to for selfish purposes, Saturn in Leo will become extremely wise and extremely people oriented. Because remember, Saturn through the signs kind of dims the ability of the positive traits of each sign. So in this case, Saturn and Leo, they are natural creators. It's the 5th house. They're brilliant when it comes to creative endeavors. And the one benefit and bonus that Saturn gives those which have Saturn in Leo is, and especially as they get older, is creative know-how. These people in their youth have a knack for gaining attention. They have natural talents and natural creative talent that is just magnificent. Problem is, again, Saturn placed with Leo has a tendency to broadcast their opinions, their talents, their creativities for selfish gains. Now, again, Saturn placed in your horoscope and its ruler, in this case the sun, and Saturn and its placement in your birth chart by house placement and the depositor of its ruler are going to make a big difference and color everything about you in your individual birth chart. But the lessons that Saturn needs to learn here is not to keep all the rewards and goodies for themselves, that it's about sharing. It's about giving. And there are sometimes with Saturn placed in Leo, because it does rule the 5th house, and that rules children, are sometimes issues with children, and sometimes those, similar to Saturn in Cancer, in their youth may have seen a toxic or dysfunctional household, especially as children, because Saturn rules children in the 5th house. And the lesson for those with Saturn in the 5th house sign of Leo is to love the next generation and to give attention to children, because this sign of all signs through Saturn is how we treat the next generation. And so Saturn and Leo uh, lessons are to become responsible with and to children. And some of the most amazing caretakers with Saturn in Leo are those who have grown older and wiser and are wonderful about treating children and taking care of children because they learned these lessons in youth. And hey, as they get older, Saturn will also be able to depend on their amazing creative abilities also to please and entertain people. And these lessons will be learned through Saturn in Leo as they get older. Now, the next Saturn we'll move to is Saturn in Virgo. Now, Saturn, maturity, wisdom, history, patience, conservatism through the sign of Virgo. Now, what does Virgo rule? It is ruled by Mercury. It rules the 6th house. And what does the 6th house rule? It rules health. It rules jobs, employment. It also rules the mundane, our daily, everyday lives. So Saturn through the sign of Virgo. First of all, Virgo is very meticulous. Saturn in Virgo makes one who is sometimes overly fussy, overly picky pokey about details in the extreme. And sometimes that can be when a Saturn in Virgo was younger, they saw somehow uncleanliness or dirtiness in their atmosphere or their family or in life somehow. So Saturn in Virgo says, when I get older, I'm not going to be like that. I'm not going to be dirty. This is, an unstable, unhealthy 6th house. Virgo with the need for cleanliness and healthiness, environment that they grew up in, or they saw. So they're like, well, when we get older, we're going to become fussy clean. We're going to be meticulous about details. 6th house, Virgo. And so you will find many Saturn and Virgo individuals are meticulous. Some on the other extreme, if they haven't learned the lessons as they got older of responsibility regarding health and cleanliness, sometimes can grow up to be hoarders or those who don't want to be responsible when it comes to details. They just kind of let everything go by the wayside. But the Saturn in Virgo individual, as they get older, will become the opposite. Some of your finest health professionals and those who are very fussy about details, cleanliness, are exhibiting Saturn in Virgo's highest qualities of cleanliness and order, practicality, sensibility. But Saturn teaches them because they have insecurities in this area of being orderly, organized, practical, sensible, dims that ability to some degree. And so Saturn says you must be responsible about these details and about being meticulous in life, because if you are not meticulous in all things, you will suffer the consequences. And that is how Saturn is a wonderful teacher. Some of the individuals with Saturn and Virgo are some of the most meticulous, fussy individuals you will find. And sixth house means that you may have to tend to your day-to-day affairs a little bit more closely than other people. And Saturn ruling the sixth house, you may have suffered poor health as a child, and so as you get older, you learn to take very good care of yourself. Wonderful dietitians, and again, those in the health profession, doctors, even those that are natural healers, because Virgo rules healing, are some of the best in our society because they have Saturn through the sign of Virgo. So they've had to take very careful and meticulous care of their health and be very mindful of details in their life. But once Saturn in Virgo teaches those with this Saturn sign about details and being more meticulous, these people will be some of the most refined and high-minded individuals there are. Okay, so, and also, by the way, with Saturn and Virgo, they will also have to learn this through their pets too, because sixth house rules pets. One more detail there. Okay, now we move on to Saturn through the sign of Libra. Now, what does Saturn again rule? It rules the maturity and the wise and patience. What does Libra rule? Libra rules relationships. It's about business relationships, all relationships with Libra, whether it's a business or personal love relationships, what have you, and the law too, by the way. Now, interestingly enough, Saturn is at its most elevated in Libra, which means actually Saturn is at her best. Now, Saturn teaches those who have Saturn in Libra probably a little bit more so starting in their youth about developing proper and equal Libra relationships. Okay, and Saturn in Libra again is kind of dimming a little bit of the positive nature through the signs, and in this case Libra. So sometimes a Saturn in Libra individual can be really kind of the opposite of what Saturn in Libra represents, which is people, which again is relationships. So Saturn in Libra can be one that is all about me. And they sometimes on the opposite scale become so consumed with relationships that they almost become competitive. Saturn in Libra is good with relationships and developing relationships, but sometimes those with Saturn in Libra are consumed with it. And this, again, as Saturn does, starts in youth. And as the Saturn in Libra individual gets older, they can become consumed at how to have the right friendships, how to have the right job, how to have the right love relationship. And if they learn the lessons as children about the natural give and take about relationships and just to let relationships flow and develop naturally. They will not become consumed with the ins and outs and the ups and downs of uh, communication and relationships. Uh, so it's not unusual because Saturn also likes to have many relationships also because Saturn's a bit of a perfectionist in Libra. It's not unusual that you will find people that have Saturn in Libra, and sometimes you can say, in this case, through the house placement, Saturn in the 7th house, you will find they have multiple marriages because Saturn has a need to get it just right when it comes to marriage or relationships. And however, Saturn in Libra is great with business. 7th house ruling contracts, not just relationships. It also rules legalities. So some of your very fine attorneys or those that deal with the law have Saturn in Libra. They somehow learn how to connect with people, good and bad, as a youth, and as they get older and wiser, Saturn in Libra teaches these individuals about what is right and wrong with connecting with individuals. But they are also very good advisors since it rules the 7th house. And they're great about giving business and legal advice. But more than that, Saturn is in Libra rules balance. So somewhere those who have Saturn in Libra will learn and grow wise about the natural give and take and balance in all relationship. And many a Saturn in Libra will grow up on the other end of the scale. If they learn the lessons regarding connections early on in life, will have very long-term marriages, commitments, relationships, because commitments of all types are what consumes Saturn in Libra, and these are the lessons about relating, commitments, connections that Saturn in Libra has to learn, is how to deal with all dealings with other people and groups. And sometimes many a Saturn in Libra will flourish in groups as they get older. Another trait with Saturn in Libra. Okay, so we move on to Saturn through the sign of Scorpio. Okay, so Saturn in Scorpio. What was Saturn ruling again? Wisdom, and it rules time, patience. And Scorpio is intense. Scorpio is a little bit of a loner. It rules the 8th house. And Scorpio and Capricorn, Pluto, Saturn, they relate to each other. It's earth and water. So Saturn through the sign of Scorpio makes an individual extremely responsible. Now, the need for power when a Saturn in Scorpio individual is young, is strong. Maybe not in the same way as Saturn in Capricorn with goals and ambitions, but Saturn in Scorpio, sometimes they have such a need for power when they get older that there's a certain insecurity. They like to be the boss, and they like to be in command over other or control others. That's somewhat of a trait of Pluto, Scorpio's ruler. And the eighth house rules, besides power, it also rules sexuality, and it rules transformation. And so Saturn in Scorpio, if they learn lessons in childhood about handling power and not wanting to have power for power's sake or to control others, will become also, as some other aforementioned Saturn signs, very giving, very kind. And in fact, when Saturn in Scorpio individuals are young, they have such a strong need to control others, it can dominate them, really. They sometimes become bullies, or they develop sneaky ways of trying to gain power or dominance over others. And they must learn as they get older that they need to not be so intense. And the lesson here is to just kind of loosen the reins a little bit and live and let live, and kind of let life develop naturally, and not to try to control everything in their surroundings or to control other people. And this can stem from those who have Saturn and Scorpio in their youth as seeing somewhat of a unnatural or unequal sense of power in the household, maybe between their parents, or somehow otherwise, in their youth, with friends. Somehow they experience some kind of intimidation, and so they grow up and they want to control everybody around them. But Saturn in Scorpio, because it is ruled by Pluto, they make wonderful counselors, because Saturn in their childhood, especially dealing with Pluto, never really got somebody to help them out, to help them sort out their problems and issues. And with Pluto is very deep. And sometimes Pluto ruling Scorpio, and Saturn in Scorpio is one, they don't like to kind of look at some of their deep issues psychologically. But somehow the lesson here is for those who have Saturn in Scorpio, as they get older, to look at some of their issues psychologically and their need to control, or their pain as children. And when they become older, they become very admired psychologists, or those in areas of authorities, whether it's, police, or whether they're fine judges or otherwise, because they somehow channeled their need for control into becoming very fine individuals in society and persons of power that are admired. And so also Saturn rules sexuality. There may have been in the youth an issue with sexuality, because again, we're talking Scorpio, 8th house, Pluto, Mars. And so Saturn is kind of quelching that. There may have been, to some degree, and this can also include Saturn in the 8th house, there could have been some kind of sexual issues growing up, and if they are not handled properly, or there is not any kind of proper counseling, those that have Saturn in Scorpio may have some deep psychological issues they need to deal with. But these individuals, once they handle a lot of these deep Plutonian Scorpio issues, are really stellar, caring, empathetic individuals in our society. So the next sign we will move to is Saturn through the sign of Sagittarius. Okay, now we're going to put Saturn, the planet of wisdom and maturity, with Sagittarius. Now, what does Sagittarius rule? Well, first of all, Sagittarians like to be outspoken. They're very freedom-loving. And when you combine the 9th house and Sagittarius with very conservative, put on the brakes, Saturn, those that have Saturn in Sagittarius may have felt in their youth that they didn't have a lot of freedom. Could be that the parent put blocks on them or made them very responsible as children. And so that when the child got older, with Saturn and Sagittarius, they became very rebellious because they did not have the freedom to do what they wanted to do. And Saturn in Sagittarius is one who likes to speak their mind. They got a little bit of the rebellion in them, the rebel. And so Saturn may have said to this Saturn in Sagittarius person, no, you can't speak your mind. You don't have the freedom to do what you want to do. You've got to be responsible. So those with Saturn in Sagittarius kind of learn at a young age that they are to speak when they are spoken to, or they have to become very prim and proper, or felt like they had to fit in and do what they were told to do. And so the 9th house is all about freedom. And Saturn also in Sagittarius rules education, 9th house. So a lot of times you find people that are highly intelligent with Saturn in Sagittarius, but because as a youth they were held back as far as being able to express themselves or to do what they wanted to do, because they were made to be very responsible in their family or in life somehow, they grow older, and then once they desire education, then they can't have that. Or it's the other end of the spectrum where this is an individual who in childhood works very hard to achieve and surmount a very stellar education and end up going on to getting their MDs, their PhDs, and being very highly educated and informed individuals. And another thing that Saturn has to learn is that it's okay to speak your mind. A lot of great philosophers or teachers have Saturn in Sagittarius because they were taught that you weren't supposed to do this when you were young. You weren't supposed to speak your mind, and that includes beliefs. Maybe they came from a family where you couldn't speak your mind about certain religious or spiritual beliefs. You couldn't be who you wanted to be, the person you wanted to be, so you felt held back. And so the lesson here for those who have Saturn in Sagittarius, as they get older, they find that they become more comfortable in their skin about who they are and who they want to be and their beliefs. And again, a lot of great teachers and those who are, yes, even authorities, uh, poets, even musicians, those who can broadcast their opinions and their thoughts become very successful in life. And the teaching here from Saturn is it's okay, because once you speak your mind, you're helping others, and you will become more comfortable in your own skin. And some people with Saturn in Sagittarius also desire travel and freedom so much in life. They become uh, uh, very avid travelers, or those that are involved with foreign lands and languages, because again, when they were younger, they didn't have this freedom to go and see the world. And, they were kind of sheltered with a very pigeonholed view of religion or beliefs, philosophy. And so they kind of developed their own philosophy as they get older. But Saturn is a sterling position for those who have brilliant minds, because they've had to develop their own mind and their own style of thinking, and they end up becoming extremely wise counselors as they get older as a result, and have much to show and to teach people. Saturn in Sagittarius. Okay, so the next Saturn we're going to look at, oh boy, is Saturn in Capricorn. Now, Saturn rules Capricorn, and so this can be a tough position for Saturn. Yes, Saturn does rule Capricorn, but because Saturn is a teacher, many people with Saturn in Capricorn sometimes have a very difficult upbringing. Because of all Saturn signs, Saturn restricts its own. And a lot of time, people that have Saturn in Capricorn grow up with a lot of personal insecurities, because Saturn places a great deal of responsibility on the individual at such a young age. It's not unusual that somehow Saturn also rules the father in astrology. It's not unusual that the Saturn in Capricorn individual had somehow extreme issues with the father and or authorities. And at the very least, in their childhood, Saturn and Capricorn individuals are held very responsible for the family. They're the caregiver, or they're the child that had to take care of everybody financially. They had to be the teacher, the wise one, the giver. Saturn in its own is extremely restrictive. Sometimes in the other extreme, Saturn, somewhat to Saturn in Capricorn, gives those who have Saturn in similar to Saturn in Cancer, gives those who have Saturn in Capricorn a toxic or dysfunctional family. So sometimes the Saturn in Capricorn individual has to grow up very young and alone. They kind of have to become their own parent, so to speak. And Saturn in Capricorn can make those who have this placement feel rather insecure about their needs and about themselves. But the beauty of all Saturn placements is, if this individual chips at their insecurities and their doubts and their fears about their self-confidence and who they are in their youth, they will become, of probably most the Saturn signs, extremely successful. This is kind of the rags to riches, if you will, Saturn, that starts out in life with nothing or very problematic and comes from a poor family or a toxic family and toxic background, to working their way up to owning the company and their business or many businesses, and become hugely successful, because Saturn in Capricorn is one who becomes very self-reliant, and they are the epitome, as they grow older, of wisdom and maturity at its best, honestly. And at a young age, Saturn, because it is also ruling the 10th house, has a very determined and focused need on their ambitions and goals very young. And regardless of their background, whether they are rich or poor, is really to some degree irrelevant, because a Saturn in Capricorn individual focuses very early on their aspirations. However, because of their backgrounds sometimes not being so proper or very good, it only adds steam to a Saturn in Capricorn's need to get ahead and be the best. And by all means, as a Saturn in Capricorn individual gets older and wiser, and boy, do they have lots of wisdom and advice to give others once they mature. They are really the epitome of wisdom, success, and most importantly, responsibility of all Saturns. Now, we will focus on the next Saturn, which is Saturn in Aquarius. Now, Saturn, the teacher, the wise one, the philosopher, is now through Aquarius. And what does Aquarius rule? Aquarius rules the 11th house, and it is ruled by Uranus. So we're putting Saturn with Uranus in Aquarius. Now, Saturn also co-rules Aquarius. So the lessons here that those with Saturn in Aquarius have to learn is their humanity. Many times, those with Saturn in Aquarius are very giving and loving to their friends, which of course also rules the 11th house. They are so giving and caring to their friends on one extreme that they don't generally get back what they give to their friends. And it hurts sometimes. These people are very humane and in a detached manner, because Saturn is with air. They have a great deal of caring and natural sympathy for those closest to them, and have a natural knack to give, whether it's in charities, whether it's to their friends, whether it's to family. So these are very almost selfless individuals. But unlike Saturn in Pisces, which is the next Saturn, they look at their giving in a more detached, less emotional manner, is more about humane giving than charity, so to speak. Now, the lesson for Saturn and Aquarius here is the slant on friendships. Because Saturn rules the 11th house, this person may grow up because either, number one, they didn't have a lot of friends. They were loners. They were individuals that felt that they tried to be a friend, but they didn't get friendship in return. The other extreme is Saturn in Aquarius has lots and lots of friends, but the same result applies, where they go out of their way to give and have many friendships and to become popular, that they don't get the same friendship or kindness in return. So the lesson here with those who have Saturn in Aquarius is that they have to learn to give unconditionally. And that hurts sometimes, because who wants to do that? I mean, sometimes even if you give, you want to have this given back in return. But Saturn says to those who have Saturn in Aquarius that your karma, which also rules Saturn, will become very recognized as you get older if in your youth you give to your friends and those closest to you unconditionally. It's kind of a law with Saturn and Aquarius. You have to be unconditional, and then you will find as these people get older that they become very popular and very admired individuals in society for giving to humanity, giving to charities, giving to their family, giving to their friends. And the lesson here is they will have to do it unconditionally, because if they do that in youth, then as they get older, they will find that there is a lot of unconditional friendship and love that will come back to them. This Saturn of all Saturns has the heaviest karma when it connects with humanity and friendships. And so the 11th house is all about giving. And so the other extreme with Saturn in Aquarius is one who doesn't want to give in their childhood. They want to keep all the goodies for themselves, and that stems from a complex of feeling unwanted or unloved or discluded by friends when they were younger. So they just say, oh, to heck with everything and everybody, I'm just going to go it alone, and I'm going to develop my objectives and ideas and ideals. This is also an Aquarian trait. I'm going to be very unique about what I want, and I'm not going to give a hoot how many friends I have, how many friends I don't have, because these people are brilliant. They have brilliant minds, and that's another stumbling block for those who had Saturn and Aquarius when they were younger. Somehow maybe there was learning disabilities, or somehow somebody told the Saturn and Aquarius people you can't do it, or somehow the family or schools, learning, friends mocked them because of their ideas or their genius or their brilliance. And so the Saturn and Aquarius individual becomes very fearful of expressing their ideas or their genius, their natural scientific or intellectual talent. So the lesson here for the Saturn and Aquarius individual is, as they get older, to develop their intellectual capability, because they will be admired for their brilliance and their scientific or intellectual thought. Highly intelligent people have Saturn and Aquarius. And so this is a bit of a complex with Saturn in Aquarius, that they have to learn that it's okay to be a free thinker, almost like Saturn in Sagittarius, but more along the lines of intellectual thinking and expression and their opinions. They were probably told, because Aquarius in the 11th house somewhat rules the mind and our opinions, and Uranus, they were told, you can't say this and you can't say that, especially along intellectual lines. They may have been thought they were too eccentric or extreme. So society says to those who have Saturn and Aquarius, you can't put forth your ideas, you can't be original, and you're a little way out with your thoughts on the future or intellectually. And so the wisdom here to Saturn and Aquarius people is, as you get older, you will feel more comfortable with your opinions, you will feel more comfortable with your mind and your genius, and not worrying about friendships also, and also learning to give humanely and unconditionally. So if you don't worry about your mind and your opinions and your giving nature, you will get back, because people will respect your mind and people will respect your humanity. And these are the lessons with Saturn in Aquarius to overcome. Now finally, we will have Saturn in Pisces. Now, what does Saturn represent again? Wisdom, the teacher. Now we have Saturn in Pisces, and Pisces rules the 12th house. And Saturn in Pisces is one who is inherently very giving, very kind, and very compassionate. And in their youth, they may have seen suffering, because we're talking the 12th house here. On the other extreme, kind of combined with the 6th, 12th house axis, and similar to Saturn in Virgo, but with the 12th house and Pisces, Neptune rulership here, this individual may have seen some health problems as a child. Or they may have suffered mentally because they were told by the parents, you can't express your compassion, you can't express your kindness and your sympathy and your empathy, because Saturn, of all Saturn signs in this case, is at its most empathetic and most compassionate. And somehow those with Saturn in Saturn in Pisces either saw suffering in their family, or they felt suffering. And again, either physical suffering, mental, psychological, physical suffering. And somehow they associated with that, and they were told as children, you just have to hold your head up and be detached. It's weak to be compassionate, to be kind. And so the lesson that these people learn as they get older is, it is a blessing to be compassionate and to be kind and to associate and have compassion with those who have less than you. So some Saturns, as they get older, if they learn the lessons of kindness and compassion as youth, when they get older, they will either have much in the way of a giving nature and become some of the greatest caretakers, doctors, those in the medical field, psychiatrists ever, because they go all out to express their emotional, charitable nature. Or those with Saturn and Pisces will develop the opposite, which is I was told or shown when I was younger suffering. So therefore, now I'm older and I could care less about this person or that person, because when I was younger, when I expressed my sympathy, I got kicked. I was told that you have to hold your head up and you have to be detached, and if you care for somebody, that's showing weakness. So you've got two of the extremes here with Saturn in Pisces. Now, there's another unusual extreme with those who have Saturn in Pisces, and this is not the most frequent, but Saturn is in the most watery of water signs in Pisces, especially being ruled in Neptune. Now, again, where you have the depositor of Pisces, or the ruler of Pisces here, in your birth chart by sign and by house will make a difference, but and the aspects. But there are those that had Saturn in Pisces who had a fear of water when they were young. There may have been a bad or negative experience around the ocean or bodies of water because of Neptune's influence. Also, Saturn, because it rules the 12th house of all Saturns, Saturn in Pisces is one who has a lot of fears of the unknown. Saturn in Pisces, again, this may stem from their youth. They developed fears towards that which is the unseen. They may have developed a instinctual, natural curiosity about the occult because of their fears about many things, about themselves, about how to deal with life, because they were so quelched as children to not express their fears or express their compassion. Some of your Saturn and Pisces individuals grow up expressing their interest in the other extreme, in the occult or the unknown, the unseen. And they become very good astrologers, psychics, intuitives, and they learned about their intuition and their psychic gifts, or how to deal with them at a young age. But the lesson here with Saturn in Pisces is to teach those with Saturn in Pisces, hey, it's okay to have compassion. It's okay to have sympathy, because as you get older, you will find your natural sense of charity and compassion will be returned. And as you become more mature and do a little sit-down psychology, you will find that you really chip away at some of your fears, that you will become a great help to other people that have those same kind of fears, whatever they may be, that somehow you gained as a child. And this includes, interestingly enough, some of their fears regarding water, or hidden fears that is concerning themselves and their own self-confidence. Because a lot of people that have Saturn in Pisces, because they are told, no, you can't express your empathy or your emotions, lack a certain self-confidence in childhood that they have to learn how to gain as a mature adult. But of all Saturn placements, Saturn in Pisces is the utmost of a kind, loving, caring individual, and they will have many friends as a result of their natural, loving, compassionate nature. So the next planet we will look at after Saturn are the outer planets, and they are Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and they are more generational in nature. If you'd like to get in touch with me, my contact information is down below. I give one-on-one readings and written reports. Please subscribe to this channel and press the bell notification. Until next time, many, many blessings.